Naked Tarot Podcast with your host, Janet Boyer. Get ready to strip down with the most provocative voice in tarot.
Hello, and welcome to the Naked Tarot Podcast. I'm your host, Janet Boyer, otherwise known as the Tarot Maven. I'm the author of Back in Time Tarot, Tarot in Reverse, and the upcoming Naked Tarot, Sassy Strip Down Advice. With my artist husband, Ron Boyer, I am also the co-creator of the Snowland deck and the Coffee Tarot. I invite you to visit my website, janetboyer.com, where you can find out all about my books, order a tarot reading, get our decks, read hundreds of reviews, and other goodies. Today, Dax Carlisle and I continue with our Tarot by the Numbers tour through the Minor Arcana, and we are going to be covering the fours and talking about how numerologically the fours apply to the Minor Arcana suits and how the Emperor and even Death factor into that sense. Emperor is usually trump 4 and Death is usually trump 13. So enjoy yet another episode. I think this was our best mini tarot lesson on the Tarot Insider show at Psychic Talk Radio. So enjoy.
So now we're going to continue our journey through the Tarot Minor Arcana, and this week it's the 4 cards. So if you've been following along, we're sort of getting somewhere now. 4 is the number of structure in numerology, but it's not the end. There's a lot more numbers to go, and sometimes people get trapped in structure in the number 4, because we had the one where it was all about self, and then came along the other one, so now there was 2, and those 2 get together and collaborate and create. Through the creation of 3, they create something, and that something that manifests is 4. And once you've gone through that process, you could say, okay, I'm done. But you actually get trapped, and you don't progress to the higher numbers where you have the balance and harmony of 6, spirituality of 7, and deeper learning, 8, which is true abundance, which is double structure, 4 and 4, and then 9, of course, the completion of the cycle. How does this help other people? So that's the little caveat, is that when you get to the 4, there's a lot more, and it's actually 5, which we're going to learn in 2 weeks. We're going to do the 5s. It's in the 5s that we learn that although there may be adversity, this is the adversity that breaks us free of
the shake-up card.
Yes, it breaks us free of that structure that may be artificial, that may be too constraining, where we don't progress further. And so there's actually a need for the chaos. Number 5 is the chaos number in numerology. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
so, and I really like the 4s a lot. My favorite, I really, I don't know, for some reason, I'm drawn to the 4 of Wands. I like that progression visually, at least in the Waite-Smith version of the deck, where you have the single wand and the Ace of Wands, and then you have the 2 of Wands, and then the 3 of Wands looks very similar, okay? And then you get to the 4 of Wands, and there's actually a structure created. You've got the 4 wands in the ground as staffs holding up, this, what would you call that? A coverage.
I think it's like a Jewish chuppah. They call it chuppah, Chuppah,
yeah.
I think it's called, chuppah.
I knew there was a word for that, like a canopy.
There's a word for everything.
Yeah, a non-English Hebrew word for it.
Yeah.
Or Yiddish. It's like a canopy of all flowers and various things like that. So you actually have a physical structure, but here's these 2 individuals in the background that are celebrating. Well, after you create, you're going to celebrate, right? I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me, celebrating accomplishments, success in your journey, taking time to honor your hard work.
Well, to back up a little, if that's okay,
yeah, go ahead.
I see the fours in general as, and this echoes, I think of all the numbers that really reflect their major arcana associations, the Emperor and the fours, I think, are the most closely related, at least in my mind, because a lot of the keywords you can apply to the Emperor could be applied to the fours when combined with their elemental, association. So I see the fours as all the fours, including the Emperor. Imagine a square. So as we're talking, everyone, imagine a square, because squares are like being fenced in. It's a structure. There's an establishment there. I also see it as like a fence, containment, boundaries. Sometimes we need to draw boundaries. Organization, rigidity, patriarchy, too. For I always associate like masculine with patriarchy and rules and authority and regulations, schedules, and things like that. And so, when you apply the four elements to that, or the minor arcana suits, it becomes interesting because, okay, if fours are a square, meaning they're containing something, or it even could be like a plateau, like you were saying, after you work and then people rest, but there's more work after that. But sometimes you do need to stop and rest and have the plateau. And, it's kind of like climbing stairs.
Yeah,
sometimes
and you see that in the Four of Swords.
Right. Sometimes you need to rest on the landing a bit and kind of like, just evaluate how far you come, if you need to add some structure or if you need to, fortify the floor or the walls or what have you. That the fours are a really good time for, a mini spot check to see how things are going. So if you imagine the fours as a square, so, for the Four of Wands, I imagine that as, kind of a community, a neighborhood, kind of like a square with a fire hydrant in it, or little houses, kind of like a patch of houses. Like if you go Google Earth and you look at, some, towns in America or urban areas, you see they look like squares. There's squares of grassy patches with a bunch of houses on it. And so I imagine that sometimes as like the Four of Wands, where the Four of Wands can mean community or rites of passage, because chuppas are, usually erected during Jewish weddings, is kind of a sacred thing, but also, a community celebration. And for like the cups, I see a square with the heart in it, which would mean like kind of closed off to love or good things. With the coins, which we'll get to, I kind of see a square with dollar signs, or, the miser or Scrooge, where it's just a bunch of coins, just trying to fence in your money, which could be good, like saving, or protecting your funds, but it also could be non-sharing. And then the swords, I kind of see a square in a bed. The bed's in the square, and it means rest, recuperation, and sometimes squaring away the thoughts, which can be meditation. So as you guys are listening to this and we talk about the fours, keep thinking of squares, because it's a sense of containment and boundaries being fenced in. There's some rigidity there, some organization, structure, establishment, limitation, and sometimes authority. Sometimes we need to be our own authority, whether, as an emperor or as one of these fours, and say no. So you might want to imagine, too, a square with the word no and an exclamation in it. No, like stay out, or I'm staying in, something like that. It's a way of erecting boundaries. So I thought I would just kind of preempt or talk about that so people can keep that in mind, that the fours are a lot like a square.
We're setting the stage. Yeah, setting the stage
with a square.
With a square, yeah. And it's it's interesting because the other four card in the major arcana, which would be 13, 1 plus 3 is 4.
Yes, I was thinking of that earlier, death. And then what's the shape of the casket? 4 sides. and there's this popular comment, too, that they say when a person's in a rut, that's just a grave, or what do they say, a coffin with the 4 sides knocked out. Meaning, and just as we were talking about a plateau, then you kind of get stuck. And it's kind of like, and that is stagnation if you think about it. Because if you had a square, and instead of a heart, you imagine like with 4 cups, it's filled with water. Well, if you stick that outside, mosquitoes end up breeding in that, and mosquitoes carry disease and other kind of vile things. That's why they always say, to help reduce, mosquito-borne viruses and disease, to not let any standing water be around anywhere, whether it's on, a piece of, like a pool liner that's extra or anything you have outside, like if it's pulling in some kind of fabric on a canopy or a bird bath or anything, that can be a breeding ground for mosquitoes and, other, disease-ridden insects. And also, stagnant water has nothing clean coming through and nothing bringing life to it and aerating it, So, again, there's that stagnation, and this kind of connected. It could be eventually to death, which, is the other 4 card if you're going to include the major arcana in the numerology aspect, being 1 + 3 is 4. So, yeah, good point.
Absolutely. I just see the 4 of Wands as marking completion of some stage, and that fits into so many things. We already mentioned the wedding, but also the Jewish bar mitzvah. That's a stage of life. It could be an anniversary, a birthday, a successful school examination, the purchase of a new home, anything along those lines when you're looking at the 4 of Wands. And then the surrounding cards can give you a clue to this, One of my favorite examples that I give out to my students is, you get 3 cards, and you get the Knight of Cups, the 2 of Cups, and then the 4 of Wands. It's a wedding invitation.
Absolutely. That's what I was thinking, or a proposal, and boom, quick marriage. Hey, let's just have family and friends in the backyard. Let's not make a big deal about it. Oh yeah, I think that any type of rite of passage where you invite friends, family, and neighbors to, it comes under the 4 of Wands, like the Spanish and Mexican tradition of the quinceanera, I believe you pronounce it, where, girls turn 15 and it's a big deal for them. The bar bat mitzvah from the Jewish tradition, family reunions, or even graduation parties. You have like perhaps the world in the 4, the 4 of Wands, or some other type of thing to indicate, some type of celebration of a milestone. I also consider the 4 of Wands like the formative years. Especially if that isn't combined with the 6 of Cups, which is childhood. That sometimes can indicate that the person's problem or the root is somehow linked to their childhood or their memories or something in the past. Because a lot of times I see as the 4 of Wands as the place you grew up, or your formative years, or the old hood, so to speak. But it also could be like outdoor entertainment, like festivals like Burning Man and what have you, where like-minded others get together to celebrate something, conventions, with unity and solidarity, because there's a sense of unity and solidarity with the 4s as well, or even town meetings, where, members of a town get together to pass some legislation or discuss some problems they have, because there's the authority and bureaucracy aspect of the 4 as well. So, the 4s are a lot deeper than people give them credit for. A lot of people just say, 4 of Wands, outdoor wedding, and I'm like, no, we could go so much deeper when you combine them with the elements and really get deeper
Burning
with
Man,
that.
Oh my God, I mean, Wands is fire,
Exactly.
That's a perfect connection,
Exactly,
but
right.
There's also the passion of that, fire element, and here we are at a place where it's a simultaneous celebration, gratitude for where you've gotten to so far, but it's like you said, okay, you're at this plateau, you can take a breath and you can look, okay, where do I go from here following my passions, and, how do I tackle the next stage, the next level, what have you?
Yeah, and going back to that, like 4 is really good for organizational meetings, and the cool thing about Burning Man is nothing is for sale there, as far as I know. From what I heard, is like people bring their stuff, and it's basically a swap and giving fest, and then of course listening to music and inspiring things, and they leave the place better than they left it, or at least they pick up everything, and it's a really cool outdoor thing. But I also see a 4 of Wands as a possible precursor to protests. Because, okay, you get the Four of Wands and you get people under the same roof sharing ideas, kind of like in a town meeting or perhaps having a loose, grassroots organization. And then they start getting really fired up because, again, fire and passion and selfhood and, is the fire suit of Wands. Then you can start getting into the fifth, which a lot of people see the Five of Wands as just like bickering or fighting. But I can also see that as like a protest as well. You got the Four of Wands and forming your ideas. You're starting to like trying to organize your passions, and the Five of Wands like, oh shit, that's it. Let's just go march. Let's just go out there and call our senators and our representatives and say this is enough shit. And because the Five of Wands then starts agitating. It's like the Five of Wands, you start getting lit by talking to other people in a community or like-minded others, and then five, you're like, okay, that's it. Then the agitation starts, and then you could start your organizing and, protests and things like that. So, yeah, the Four of Wands is a very rich card, even though it looks pretty simplistic.
Absolutely. Let's see. Where should we go from here? Four of Cups?
That's good. Four of Cups,
you were mentioning that earlier, yeah. Yeah.
It's like a ho-hum card because, emotions I don't feel are supposed to be fenced in. And, yes, we need to have some self-control. That's what separates us from animals is the self-control of instincts and emotions. The taming of the beast or the base nature and instincts like that is shown in the Strength card. However, if you don't adequately feel and express your emotions, then it has to go underground a lot of times. And if it goes underground, then it results in sometimes depression and or suppression, and repression, and then that can cause, a lot of problems down the road. So I feel like, love and feelings aren't something that need to be contained. So I think that's why a lot of times the person that's portrayed in a Four of Cups is shown as a bored person or someone who can't see the good or they have no wonderment at all. They're in a funk. Sometimes it's ingratitude. It could be an unwillingness to commit because, the cups are also associated not just with emotions, but relationships. So I see sometimes as the Four Cups is the unwillingness, to commit. Somebody who's closed to love, and then pessimism and cynicism works its way out, some type of malaise. There's just a lack of interest, or a wallflower, or someone who is unmotivated. Because, when you try to fence yourself in and protect yourself against social interaction or against relationships. But again, sometimes they're healthy where you say no. You say, I'm not going to allow you to intrude on my space anymore. I'm not going to be a giver, out of balance with getting or receiving, So sometimes, every card has, as we've talked about before, has a continuum, a spectrum. And for me, when it starts going to non-beneficial or harmful, that's when we look at the reverse. For you would look in probably the question at hand. Some other person may look at dignity, whether a card is ill-dignified, what it's surrounded by. But every card can have some positive aspects, and other times it can have, or beneficial, and then it could have a harmful effect. And so, but a lot of times the Four of Cups is just, they're keeping love and emotions and excitement and wonderment boxed off. They're compartmentalizing for some reason. And sometimes we compartmentalize for survival. I mean, our brain compartmentalizes just to survive because if we felt everything at once or experienced all the sensory overload, sensory things that our senses pick up, if we actually experienced everything consciously at one time, we'd be overloaded, So, some of that compartmentalization is good, but too much of it, then you start becoming, getting a split soul, so to speak. You start splitting yourself off, and the rest of your chakras are not connected and communicating. And then that's where sometimes you can get cut off with your body and all the other elements, your thought processes, you get cut off, your feelings and things like that.
Right. I see a lot of spectrum. And it just depends on, what's going on. What's the question? Who's the client? What are the surrounding cards? In the whole spectrum, I see it as a withdrawal from emotional situation. But is it because it's voluntary, like you're taking time out to contemplate or meditate, or is it more involuntary where, you're tired of a situation or you're finding lack. You know, when you look at the expression in the Waite-Smith version, it can really go either way. You know, they could just be analyzing.
Right. Now, see, I see that as more Four of Swords, the voluntary withdrawal to contemplate or meditate.
Mm-hmm.
Because when it's voluntary, then it implies that there's been a decision. And when a decision has consciously been made, then I think we're getting more in the sword suit. But with feelings are so, you know, what's the word? They're so fluid and abstract, and they are connected to thoughts, but sometimes we, you know, have subconscious reactions to things, and instinct can be connected to emotion, and it could be connected to, you know, assumptions. And so emotions, you know, I think that's why they're really watery, and they're kind of like with the moon and stuff, you know, they're hard to peg sometimes. And sometimes people just get so overwhelmed with emotion, and then they start trying to build these little fences, you know, to try to wall off either parts of themselves or parts of their life from one another. But for me, I consider the conscious withdrawal to contemplate and meditate to be more of a Four of Swords thing, because then you have enough of emotional clarity, or, you know, where the waters aren't quite, you know, they're still kind of calm, but you say to yourself, you know what, there's just too much crazy around me, and so I need to. It's kind of like a mini hermit in a way, except not with necessarily a spiritual or mystical connection. It might just be literally, you know, I need to take a nap because the world's too much. I mean, a nap can cure so much. That's what Ron and I say. I says, oh, my God, thank God for sleep. You know, we'd go crazy.
I need the nap. I need a nap, you know.
Yes.
And I did want to point
chocolate.
Right. Absolutely, you know. And I did want to point out, for those that are following along, you know, with the Waite-Smith version, you have that classic fourth cup coming out of the cloud, like being presented by the universe. You know, here's another possibility, another opportunity, something else, you know, which the individual in the card doesn't seem to be aware of. I think they are sometimes, but sometimes they're not, you know, and the card comes up a lot for me when there's opportunities which might lead to emotional stability, because we're talking about the water element, but they're just not seeing it. You know, they need to think outside of the box a little bit, and it's very hard to do because we're not in the swords, we're in the cups right now. You know. Yeah,
and look at his body language in the Rider-Waite-Smith. His arms are crossed. And in body language, when you have your arms crossed, that is a sign of defense, of protection, of being uncomfortable, being vulnerable, or being seen. So, like, if you look in body language books, you know, that's a prime. So anytime you see somebody that might be smiling, you know, on an interview, or let's say they're sitting on a couch with some other person, and, you know, watch body language. It's very interesting. Like, the legs, when, like, let's say there's 3 celebrities on a couch. If one of them has their legs crossed opposite of the other person, that sometimes can indicate, you know, I'm not really big on you, or if they have a space between them. But another thing is, and that's why I always, you know, I would never recommend anybody in marketing having their arms crossed. You know, sometimes people think that makes them look badass or assured, but in body language, actually, crossed arms mean I am protecting myself from you. I am not open to you. I am defensive. I am afraid to be vulnerable.
You need to be open.
Yeah, and a lot of times where they cross the arms can indicate lots, and most of the times notice it's the heart chakra and the third chakra, where you're dealing with love and openness, which is, you know, water cups, but also the third chakra, which we're dealing with fire and self-esteem and selfhood. But there are times where a person, especially a woman, and understandably so in sometimes of the modern context, with the Me Too movement and, you know, things like that, notice a woman sometimes will stand with her hands in a V, and they're clasped where at? Near her second chakra, below the belly button, protecting the reproductive area and the second chakra. So, you know, body language, whether it's in the Rider-Waite or other decks, can sometimes give other really helpful clues. And so for the Four of Cups and the Rider-Waite, you know, his or her arms are crossed. And it's basically, I don't want what you're giving. And so some people don't want to see the good in the world. Some people like to be miserable and cynical and, negative, and we'll see the result of that, in the Five of Cups, where, then they're really like boo-hooing. But sometimes it's kind of like a little emotional tantrum, and sometimes it's a refusal to see the wonderment. You're failing to be impressed. It could be also emotional overwhelm. And again, that gets back to compartmentalization. A person is so overwhelmed, I have hiccups, so overwhelmed by what they're seeing and experiencing in the world that they're basically saying, no more, too much, I can't take anymore. And that, again, can be a positive thing when you're like, okay, overwhelmed, I got to withdraw here, I don't want what you're offering. And that could be emotionally saying, I don't, like if somebody's giving you bullshit online or, trying to push something on you or telling you you need to feel a certain way, you cross your arms and say, no, I don't want what you're offering me. Because notice the cups in front of that person are nice and they're upright and they're filled and they're cool. Mm-hmm. And so there's nothing wrong with wanting what you have and having what you already want. Because sometimes then if you try to keep wanting more, then you get onto the, where you're like a spiritual hoarder, and you just are trying to fill that hole. So there's nothing wrong with the Four of Cups or any of the fours, because sometimes that is the stage of digestion, where you've received information, you've actually even produced some things perhaps, or through creativity in the three, but there's a time to digest it, because we don't just eat food and then crap it out. We have to, in order to assimilate knowledge, wisdom, or, in the practical real-life metaphor, vitamins, nutrients, what have you, we cannot bypass the absorption stage, through the stomach and the intestines. So, we have to have that breakdown of the foods and, the assimilation of the acids and what have you in order for the body to function. So sometimes it's okay to say no and say no more, or I don't want what you're selling,
So, Janet, you already mentioned Four of Swords. Let's talk about Four of Swords. It's a very interesting card. I've always liked that. Me
too. Some people get, spooked by it, especially in the Rider-Waite, because it shows a sarcophagus of presumably a fallen soldier. But if you look in the stained glass, it seems to spell PAX, which is Latin for peace, Pax. But some people get a little freaked out because they think it means death and what have you. But I consider that more of like a timeout. Because if you're squaring your thoughts, or if you're if you're putting boundaries on your thoughts, there's a sense of rest and retreat and meditation. Because you're squaring away your thoughts. You're getting a sense of perspective. I just, Noah and I just watched an awesome documentary movie about Temple Grandin. Do you know who Temple Grandin is?
No.
She's the woman who's autistic. Temple Grandin is autistic, but she's brilliant, PhD. She has revolutionized the cattle industry by making more humane slaughterhouses and to not spook them. She says if we raise animals for meat, we owe it to them to give them respect, and so they live a good, wonderful, non-fearful life, But anyway, the movie is called Temple Grandin, and Claire Danes played her brilliantly. And as a matter of fact, a new tarot deck called Our Tarot that was successfully funded on Kickstarter is completely dedicated to women, the Our being women. And interestingly, she chose Temple Grandin for the Magician. And she actually said that that creator contacted Temple and asked her for her permission to use her likeness as the Magician, and Temple was really happy to agree to that. So that was so cool. Afterwards, Noah and I read the entry to the Magician, who is Temple Grandin, and because I haven't had really time to explore the Our Tarot. But I say all that to say that Temple is very interesting in that she is a type of person that she thinks in pictures. And if anybody wants to see a wonderful TED Talk with her, just Google TED Talk Temple Grandin, or even go into YouTube Temple Grandin, and you'll see a bunch of interviews with Temple and find out more about her work, and you'll see even a trailer for the movie that was on HBO. But she was talking about the autistic condition and just how she saw things differently, and how it caused her a lot of challenges in school and what have you. But one of the things was that she had this very neat science teacher who wasn't necessarily accredited as a science teacher, but he was a former NASA scientist, and so in this special boarding school, they allowed him to teach, and he recognized the brilliance in her where other people were seeing her behavioral challenges or some of the things that she was going through, and he nurtured her, and he was a good mentor to her. And he showed the kids this short movie about perspective, and it looked like there was two guys in a room, but one looked really tiny and one looked really tall. But then it showed them actually walking to either side of the room, and one became big and one became smaller. And she's like, how did they do that? And she couldn't figure it out. And he says, okay, you tell me how they figured that out, and extra credit if you can reproduce it somehow. And she'd get so frustrated with trying to design, how did they do this? How can two people of the same height be in a room, switch sides, and one looks tiny and the other one looks tall, And I don't want to spoil it in case you haven't seen the movie because it's really cool. But let's just say it's a matter of perspective, okay? And so I tend to see the Four of Swords as a matter of perspective because sometimes we can blow things out of proportion, sometimes we can minimize things, sometimes we can't see things clearly at all, which is why it's very good to square away emotion and have time to just pull back, unplug, and say, okay, let me sit with myself, let me sit with my thoughts, and let me see what's really going on. And then, of course, sometimes people draw a tarot card for that, to say, okay, what do I need to know, what's going on? And it's almost a physical, the tarot card draw is almost like a physical representation or a snapshot of some of the thought processes. So then you have a starting point because sometimes, emotions as well, as in the Four of Cups, but Four of Swords, sometimes thoughts can get overwhelming, especially if somebody struggles with anxiety or some kind of condition like that or stress. And it's like, where the hell do you start? It's like being offered a tangle of yarn that a kitty's been playing with. Where do you find the end? How do you untangle it? And so sometimes I see the Four of Swords as the backing up, squaring away the thoughts and saying, okay, let me look at everything I have here and let me sort them out, and help untangle. And sometimes you cannot untangle your thoughts until you know what they are, and you get quiet with them and you say, okay, and then that's when you can take time to contemplate and actually meditate where you focus on your breath, in and out. And then, when you have that quiet time and that empty space, your thoughts then have a way of being able to present themselves as individual strands instead of this tangled tapestry that's driving you crazy. So I see the Four of Swords a lot of times as a retreat, a rest, a sabbatical, and sometimes, that can be physical because sometimes, many stress-related illnesses they stem from the mind, and so it can be beneficial to just nap, like I said, or just say, to spend the weekend doing nothing or what have you, to let your body have a chance to process. Again, we get into the digestion part, to digest what it has experienced for the day or the week, and to reset itself and to, so you can have a clearer perspective on what's going on in life.
Yeah, going back to Temple real quickly, I wanted to mention that there is a phenomenon about that, and it makes a lot of sense what she did with the cattle industry. And you can Google why meat from scared animals tastes worse, because if you're scaring them, it actually tastes worse. And I have heard about that phenomenon before, and I'm definitely going to, I Googled the TED Talk. I'm definitely going to, here's one, The World Needs All Kinds of Minds. I need to watch this one.
Yes, that's the one, and we watched that as well. And we knew about Temple because, for those who don't know, Ron and I, our son Noah, was diagnosed when he was around 4 with autism. And we worked with him, and now he's doing really well. He'll be 20 in September. He's helped me make the Boyer Charm Oracle. He's our assistant. He's starting to make tarot bags for us. He's got a passion for sewing and tailoring. He's talented with the piano. He's a great artist, and so really pleased. But there are still some challenges, and it breaks my heart every once in a while when Noah says, sometimes I wish I were normal. And I'm like, no, believe me, you don't want to be normal. I'm supposedly, neuronormative, which is normal, and I'm totally against being normal because that's what's boring. And even Temple Grandin makes the point that she said if the autism gene was not in humanity's genetic legacy, that we would still be standing around on the fire telling stories instead of going out making tools and hunting and starting civilization and industry. And she pointed out that a lot of people that are in Silicon Valley are on the autism spectrum. She feels that Tesla and Einstein and other, greats like that, and even Mark Zuckerberg, she feels, is on the autism spectrum. And she talks about the different ways that different autistics think. Not all of them think in pictures, and there it's a spectrum, just like tarot cards. Like she noted that some of them are so severe that they are nonverbal. Sometimes they can, they can't take care of themselves. To the high functioning, and sometimes then you have your savants and who are geniuses. But there are challenges though in the stimulation, because a lot of times they didn't realize why some children would spin around a lot. The autistic child would spin around or lay on the ground and roll. And basically the self-stimulation was to calm them, and it was to try to order their sensory stimulation, which was overwhelming for them. And so, the Four of Swords can also, if you really want to get deep and wide with this, it can connect to those who are suffering from the autism byproduct, autistic byproducts of sensory overload. But sometimes even I experience that. I go to Walmart sometimes and those fluorescent lights and all the people, I'm like, I'm in there 10 minutes. I'm like, Ron, we got to get out of here. I can't take it. I'm too sensitive to it. And there's something about Walmart, my God, well, at least the one in this one town, that just drives me crazy. And so, a Four of Swords can very much mean getting the hell out of Dodge, to protect putting a fence around, your well-being, the overload, sensory overload. And, with our environment, we don't know the kind of stuff we're getting bombarded with, with wireless technology and EMFs and things like that, and perhaps even solar flares.
Oh, I just watched a whole bunch of YouTube videos on that.
Really? Yeah, and that's
it's
that's
scary.
why
I don't hold my phone next to me anymore. I put it in my backpack.
Well, right. I mean, the episodes of brain cancer. I mean, and then if you go really far out in left field with the likes of people like David Icke, who says that there's basically a frequency that's used to kind of numb and dumb you so that you can be controlled by the elite, And so, you could get really crazy. And some people, I even have a little orgone, pyramid that supposedly helps neutralize the EMFs. I figure, hey, it can't hurt. It looks pretty. But yeah, so Four of Swords, and think about it, swords also can connect because swords are air. Air connects to Hermes, the god of communication. And so, that whole thing can deal with airwaves, radio waves, EMFs, anything that we can't see that's broadcast in the air, which is why it definitely makes sense the Four of Swords can mean to protect yourself or shield yourself from all the shit that's in the air.
Yeah.
Isn't that cool how tarot could be like stretched like taffy?
Oh, yeah. And what I wanted to mention was about the David Icke thing. It's like that explains so much that's been going on, with the politics and electorate in the United States. Then, why half of us are absolutely out of our minds and ridiculous. I mean, it's just...
And we won't say which half it is, but
exactly. You can extrapolate.
Yes. I know.
Yeah, especially the mind-numbing part you said, the mind-numbing, where they'll listen to anything, how ridiculous, and go, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, and if the person from the other party would have said that 8 to 10 years ago, it would, hell to pay, riots in the streets. And I'm like, I feel like, it's like the Stranger Things show, that we're in the upside-down world right now. It's like, oh, my God. And so I try to, and sometimes the Four Swords can mean protecting your mind, not like you're being an ostrich, although that could be an ostrich card. But I see that more as the Two of Swords, refusing to see. But I see as the Four of Swords as more of a conscious pulling back, saying, you know what, I can't handle watching the news today. It's the same, more the same, and just apart from the conspiracy theory of, supposedly electronic pulse emissions, 5G and all that stuff, but just the fact that people walk around on their phones like the zombie apocalypse. I'm like, so much shit could happen.
They're standing right next to each other and they're texting to each other. It's ridiculous.
Oh, Well, a couple of years ago, a tarot artist creator, she's only created one deck, but, you know, she thought it was funny that her and her kids were texting each other in the house, and that's how they communicated. She thought that was funny. Needless to say, I quietly unfriended her because I'm like, I don't want anybody...
I want to point out real quick before I forget, because you mentioned something earlier, you know, about sometimes the mental shielding, and I want to point out that on the at least, you know, Waite Smith versions of the card with the 3 swords on the wall, and they look like they're the sword of Damocles hanging down, and I've always taken it that, you know, under the sarcophagus or on the side of it with the single sword that's vertical, and then the other 3 are horizontal, but they're on the wall and lined up. It's like putting all those thoughts and ideas to the side, and then focusing on this one idea that's below the individual and on the side of the sarcophagus there that's horizontal, you know. And so it's kind of played out in the visuals here a little bit, I wanted to point out.
Oh, yeah. And before you focus on the one, though, you have to have the emptying. You know what I'm saying? It's almost like you have to allow your mind to be a bit blank, or be in that meditative state where you're focusing more on the breath, to kind of have like a blank slate or kind of an eraser board or a reboot. So then you can get the Ace of Swords in there to start then, okay, now we can examine things one thing at a time or in a more, you know, balanced perspective. But absolutely. But sometimes you got to rest before you do that, you know, because, you know, Einstein once said that if you try to approach the problem with the same mindset as that which created it, you know, it's insanity. You can't do it. So you have to have a higher perspective. Quotes. Oh, me too. So you have to. That's very swordsy and very true. And of course, he supposedly probably was on the autism spectrum. So autism is a gift. You know, it really is. For people trying to eradicate it, you know, that's, you know, no. We just need to channel it and help these kids and these people, you know, and employ them. But that's a whole other. But the point being, it's interesting that it was Einstein himself who was supposedly autistic and had a different perspective and a different way of seeing the world, who said that, you know. And sometimes in order to square away our thoughts or to de-stress or to become healed or to meditate, we have got to approach with a totally different mindset or a totally different set of tools than what created it. So if you're in a stressful situation and you have jumbled thoughts and you can't just make heads nor tails and you're upset, well, you can't try to solve it when you're in that state because you'll just make it worse, or as Einstein said, it's insanity. So that's why the 4, especially the 4 swords, is so needed, so you can rest, meditate, slow down, decompress, unplug, you know, stay away from stimulants like caffeine and what have you, and then you can see things, you know, in a more relaxed state. And you've stopped the input of information, you've shut the door on it, and then you can digest and process what you've already, you know, which has already bombarded you or what you've already ingested. And then you can choose whether or not to keep or, you know, to eject those thoughts or assumptions or beliefs when you're in that state. You know, but you have to be in that calm, you know, placid state in order, you know, just like a lake. You know, if it's smooth and clean, you could see to the bottom. But if it's all turbulent or muddy or gross, you cannot see to, you know, watch where you're stepping. There could be a piece of glass down there. So the mind is kind of the same way. You know, when you want to try to get, with the 4 swords, a stillness of mind, so you can actually see what's underneath, and then you can more adequately traverse, you know, where you're going, but also see if you need to, you know, take something dangerous out of the picture and just remove it from your life.
Wow, tons of information. This is probably our best episode of the journey so far. I'm just loving it. I'm really glad that we're actually ending on the 4 of Pentacles because it's one of my classic explanations of breaking free of the structure of 4 with the 5s, which we're going to talk about in 2 weeks on our show about the 5s. And so it's a great place to end here. Going along, continuing our theme of the number 4 in numerology is structure, and your analogy of the cube, you know, really fits so well. You know, the square, but I'm thinking three-dimensionally as the cube. It really fits this Four of Pentacles, think of the cube as a bank vault. Think of the cube as your house. Your house, your investment portfolio. Here you're establishing some security, and in the image, in the Waite Smith version of the deck, he's really holding on to those pentacles there, and that's where we also get the other side of the spectrum that some people frequently give the connotation with this card that we are holding on too tight, because if you look in the image, it really does look like he's holding on a little bit too tight, So we're kind of at that plateau situation again, I think, where we've established some structure, and we have the financial investments, which may include your house, which could be the bank vault. You got your funds in there. You've got investments, but you can hold on too tight. And if it wasn't for the 5 energy, you would never break free to the 6, 7, and we'll be talking about that in future shows. But there's something about money. We think that gathering as much as you can and storing it away is the best way. And I'm not saying anything against investments or anything like that, but the way the universe works is a flow. And so value, money is just an exchange of energy. So this energy exchange, flows into your life and flows out. And the more it flows in and the more it flows out, the more flows in. And it's a different way of looking at investing. Sure, you do the investments. Sure, you have the bank account and the home, and maybe other property. Maybe the cube is talking about investment properties too, right? And all these other things. But we got to be careful we don't get stuck and only do this type of structure, that we only do this type of creating abundance and wealth, because wealth and abundance also comes through this flow, because the more you do the energy exchange, the more the universe goes, oh, they want more of that, so we're going to give them more on the back end. That's the inflow of the value, and then you're flowing it out again. Now, some of that accumulates. That's your investment in whatever form they take, stock, bonds, homes, property, you name it. But it flows out. And if you dam it off, then the flow stops, and the universe goes, oh, you don't want any more of this, so we're not going to flow any more in, And so it's like a river. And
I think that's why the 4s are not only plateaus, but they can be stagnation.
Yes,
because
there is stagnation.
There's nothing going in or out sometimes, and I think that's why I consider this a hoarding card as well, like somebody who saves things and they hoard it. And a lot of times underscoring that is a fear of lack, or having a scarcity mindset.
Scarcity
the
mindset.
square things that could be a safety deposit box. Also, if your body is a temple, you can imagine too that the fear of coins can apply to your body. It can mean like a weight loss plateau, but it also can mean that like a chronic condition or an illness has halted. It's not getting any worse. You're stable. So stable, if someone says, how's that person's physical? I heard they were in a hospital. They're in stable condition. Well, that's 4 of coins, because you're stable in your physical body and your health. And sometimes, too, it's, as I said, 4s are a lot like fences. And so, too, it could mean that you're eliminating certain things from your diet in order to protect your health, because 4, again, is protection as well, keeping things out or in. So, since the physical aspect of coins can include not only funds, money, investments, property, but it also can include our physical body, because we're a part of that material world. So, sometimes when you're trying to eliminate, it could be an indication to eliminate certain things from your diet in order to preserve your health, I also see this sometimes as saving money, which sometimes you need to do, especially if you want to buy something that's a big ticket item, and you don't want to be using credit cards. I consider the 6 of coins like a credit card. card, but I consider the Four of Coins cash only. So basically, Four of Coins is only buying what you can pay for. Only what you can truly afford, which is cash only. Whereas if you're trying to borrow money or getting debt to get what you want, well then you're up to the Six of Coins. And so there's stockpiling energy with this, but also can mean asserting financial control, over a company or the house or something like that, or it could be storing. But it also can be owned by things, when you're owned by things, or you're isolated by your wealth.
Yeah.
Just like that saying, what is it from the Bible, what is it to gain the whole world and lose your own soul? But also, not only that, what is it to gain the whole world and you lose all your friends, or you really can't enjoy what you have because you're miserable for whatever reason. But there also is, a nice preservation energy to this. So, to preserve a memory, that might be like Four of Coins plus Six of Cups. A person who scrapbooks or who, puts, old photos and crafts, there you have it. You got your memory plus preservation of a physical item. So, there's a lot of things that the Four of Coins can mean as well. That's not just funds and money, but a lot of times our attitude towards money kind of reflects our attitudes towards abundance and scarcity in other areas as well.
Yes, but I love how it's a spectrum. People will look at the Four of Pentacles and they'll have that one concept about what that means, and every time it shows up they'll throw out the exact same thing. It's like you're holding too tight to money, or you're hoarding, or
right.
or even if it's one of the positive aspects of the card on the other side of the spectrum, if that's all they ever think of when they see that card, you have to look at the whole spectrum,
right,
and relate it to what you're actually doing. Who's the client, what's the reading? What's the question or questions? What's the spread? What's the surrounding cards? And
that's why I like the non-Rider-Waite cards, because I think a lot of times people get stuck in those ruts and those overused tarot recipe meanings, and they don't go beyond the 3 or 4 meanings, is because they're sticking to the Rider-Waite. And I think that's what's so exciting about non-Rider-Waite decks, because then the artist translates those energies and that spectrum and those meanings into fresh imagery where it makes more sense to a client or a reader, and it expands the meaning as well.
And, this journey that we're going on now, I think really helps people see these differences and the possibilities and the full spectrum, where if they've been studying up to this point, they go, oh, I never thought of that. Oh, I never saw that in the card.
Right. Yeah, that's why it's beneficial to have podcasts and mini classes like this, where you have a variety of experience, whether it's in deck creation or teaching tarot or just tarot in general, or you have different decks that you've referenced over the years, and so you can kind of see the different takes, and you've expanded your meanings, the catch of associations beyond just 3 or 4, and then you can put it out there for people to then start getting excited about the cards again and starting their own tarot journey and making their own associations and going deeper and wider with the cards and not feel limited by what traditionalists, say.
So I'm looking forward now to the 5 cards. And it's interesting because most people don't look forward to the 5 cards. They're kind of akin to the scary cards in the major arcana, like the Death card and the Tower card. The 5 cards in the minor arcana, people don't want those to show up in readings.
They're disruptive. They're very disruptive.
There's so much more to it, though. There's so much more to
I'm
it.
a fan of the 5. You're preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
Remember you thought that I was a life path 5 because I do love that energy.
Yes, you very much could have been, but I bet there's 5 energy in there somewhere in that chart. But but from a numerological,
you did tell me. I can't. Right. I couldn't remember what it was,
yeah.
but you did say that I did have some 5. I have to get that from you so I can study it better. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of that 5 energy. Well, if you believe in birth cards, my birth cards are the Chariot and the Tower. So, and then I'm a quadruple Scorpio, which is very Plutonic, and so I'm very much into that. And Marcia and I have an Aries rising, so I'm very into that disruptive energy. Because I feel a lot of times the good stuff can't be revealed until you start shaking and stirring things up,
Yes, I mean, everybody is shaped by all their experience, even more so by the negative experiences than by the positive experiences.
Yeah, usually.
And then from a numerological point of view, you really can so easily get stuck in the structure of 4 and not progress to the higher numbers without that 5 energy, that chaos. But it's a spectrum. So from a purely numerological point of view, there's this vast spectrum between how that number could be chaos. We actually literally call it the chaos number in numerology, but it's also the number of the adventurer, of high energy, of getting things done. I always equate it to in astrology with the Mercury retrograde. Everybody's afraid of the Mercury retrograde and the disruptions of communication and so forth, but it's also a fast-moving, high-energy time where you can get so much more accomplished than you normally do.
And, the 4s, too, are all about playing it safe in a comfort zone. And sometimes people stop at the 4 because they don't want that adventurous aspect. They want to play it safe because 5s, to get into that 5 zone, it takes risk, and people do not like change, and so,
I just thought of something. What you were saying all along about the cube, about the square, and 5 is literally thinking outside of the box.
Exactly.
so
there
you go, folks. We've given you a little taste. What's coming up?
Show.
Oh, I can't wait. Well, thanks, Janet. This has been a lot of fun, and I can't wait for 2 weeks.
Yeah, where we get to the disruptive 5s. Woohoo, thinking out of the box. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and it was good to be with you, Dax, as always.